Good evening, I am the Archaeologist. Welcome to Britain's most haunted places where you can stay overnight if you dare. We'll count back from 5 to 1, and number 5 is the Mermaid Inn, which stands in the medieval town of Rye in East Essex. What a lovely place to live. It has some magnificent architecture like this church by the looks of it, or it could be a public toilet. But if any building in Rye was going to be haunted, it would be this gigantic church. It looks creepy as hell. But no, we're going to talk about the Mermaid Inn that looks a lot less terrifying. But believe me, its cellars are believed to date back to the medieval period. And the rest of the building dates to 1420. That's very old indeed. It has low ceilings, dark oak panelling, enormous fireplaces, and passages that appear to lead somewhere they probably shouldn't. In other words, my friends, it looks haunted. The inn also has a genuine connection to the Hawkhurst gang, a particularly violent group of smugglers who operated across southern England during the 18th century. These weren't just charming rogues sneaking barrels of brandy past sleepy customs officers. They were organised and ruthless criminals. They looked like good lads, but they were not. And the Mermaid Inn became one of the places associated with meetings and activities. Today, guests report several apparitions throughout the building. In room 17, the one we're looking at right now, called the King's Mill Room, one of the best stories from the Mermaid Inn comes. The room is said to become intensely cold while the rocking chair starts rocking without anyone being near it. According to the hotel, or the people who work in the hotel, chambermaids do not want to work in this room alone. They clean it in pairs. And to be quite frank, there is something deeply unpleasant about a rocking chair that moves by itself. A door slamming, you can write that off to a draft or something. Floorboards creak, houses move, that sort of thing. But a chair rocking by itself is definitely not the sort of thing that I would like to encounter, because it's a creepy old woman ghost. And it reminds me, if you understand who this is, of the King Diamond album, Them. Anyway, if that floats your boat, feel free to visit the Mermaid Inn. And the rates are particularly good. You can stay overnight for as little as £129. And I bet the breakfast is fantastic. A charming Welsh village, Llanfihangel Craconi, holds the next in our top 5 haunted places you can go right now and stay in. I am so proud of myself for being able to pronounce that, although it was probably completely wrong. This is the Skirrid Mountain Inn. It is frequently described as one of the oldest and most haunted pubs in Wales. How many haunted pubs are there in Wales if this is just one of them? It's brilliant. The Skirrid Inn looks absolutely lovely. I would love to go there for a pint. The building's exact history is difficult to separate from folklore, however, because this is what happens when a building is this old. Fact becomes story. Story becomes tradition. And sometimes fable becomes story, and then it becomes tradition. You can never tell. The most famous legend of the Skirrid Inn claims that the inn once served as a courthouse where condemned prisoners were sentenced and hanged from an oak beam above the staircase. This very staircase. Some versions claim that as many as 180 people were executed there. Probably some of them didn't even do stuff that bad. In those days, I don't know, if you farted in front of a lady, you could be hanged. And especially with this fellow here, Judge Jeffreys, a notorious 17th century judge whose name became linked with brutal sentencing after the Monmouth Rebellion. He sentenced 251 people to death in one day. Only 74 of them were eventually executed, so, well, it's not that bad really, is it? What a terrible fellow. Why am I not surprised then But 180 people being hanged in the same place produces a few ghosts. Visitors have reported sudden coldness, the sound of footsteps behind them, and the feeling of an unseen presence near the staircase. Others claim to have experienced the sensation of a rope tightening around their throats. No thank you. However, now you can just go on a ghost hunt and get some supper from the Skirrid Inn. Last few places available, so that by the time you watch this, it's time to get a move on. £65 is not a lot of money. Now we're going to stay in Wales for number 3. Ruthin Castle in the Vale of Clwyd in North Wales. That does not look haunted. It looks amazing, but not haunted. The original castle was established during the reign of Edward I in the 13th century. It endured rebellion, conflict, and an 11-week siege during the English Civil War in 1646. It was dismantled and battered to hell at that time. The castle's most famous supernatural resident is known as the Grey Lady. She appears mostly around the battlements and banqueting areas. She has been seen by enough independent observers for this to be more than just a joke or a prank or a hoax. Apparently, this is the story, she discovered her husband was having an affair with a local woman, and in a jealous, murderous rage, she chopped her up with an axe. Then she was convicted of murder, executed, and buried outside consecrated ground. And we all know that when that happens, you come back to do some haunting because you did not like that. Betrayal, violence, punishment. A person who cannot leave the place where everything went wrong. This is a classic ghost story. Bless the Grey Lady. Guests have also reported other ghosts, like a soldier and a young girl. I would like to see neither of them, actually. 400 years of conflict at Ruthin Castle. It's no surprise that folk stories have built up. This is the thing about Britain. It's so old and ancient, and there's been civilization here and records kept for so long, that we've got tons of ghosts. More than any other country, I reckon. Gotta be. Nevertheless, today you can stay in Ruthin Castle. It has about 60 bedrooms, ranging from standard rooms to elaborate suites. You can walk through the grounds, explore the historical remains, and then sleep inside a building that has occupied the same landscape for nearly 8 centuries. Terrific. Now, at the other end of the spectrum, we have the prestigious Langham Hotel. Amazing. The Langham Hotel opened on the 10th of June 1865, promoted as one of Europe's first grand hotels, and was designed to offer a level of comfort and technology that was exceptional for the Victorian period. Innovations included hydraulic lifts, modern bathrooms, thank heavens, and advanced lighting and ventilation systems. Well, that's more than we have in many hotels now. The opening was attended by the Prince of Wales and members of Victorian high society, and the hotel soon attracted politicians, writers, musicians, and royalty. Delightful. Among its celebrated guests were Mark Twain, Oscar Wilde, and Sir Arthur Conan Doyle. Sir Arthur also used the Langham as a setting in some of his Sherlock Holmes stories. Maybe the only investigator more famous and elegant than the archaeologist. You can see that the Langham is a work of art. You would not expect it to be haunted. But alongside its reputation for luxury, another identity gradually developed. The Langham became known as one of London's most haunted hotels. One room has become more closely connected with these reports than any other. Room 333. The number of half a beast. The most frequently repeated account dates from 1973 and involves BBC broadcaster Alexander Gordon. The fellow, if you are older than say 35 or so and you like football and you live in the UK, you will know this chap. He used to read out the football scores and is the only person I've ever heard use the words Hamilton academical. Fantastic. If you know who I mean, you can hear his voice now. According to Gordon, he awoke one night and saw a great big ball of fluorescent light suspended inside the room above his head. Well, transfixed, he watched the light change shape, and it became the figure of a man wearing Victorian evening clothes. Well, that's unexpected. Some descriptions give the figure a cravat, dark formal clothing, and an unnaturally pale or hollow appearance. Well, it's a ghost, so I'm not surprised. The lower part of the apparition was either missing or faded away. Gordon is said, quite bravely, to have asked the figure, "What do you want, sir?" And instead of answering, the apparition just began moving toward him with his arms extended. No thanks. Unsurprisingly, James Gordon made a swift exit. After some research, I've discovered that this was a Victorian doctor who killed his wife in this very room and then took his own life. Well, maybe he thought the BBC presenter was his wife when he was haunting, who knows. Another apparition seen in the hotel quite often is that of a ghostly German prince, believed by some to have died after falling or jumping from an upper window. His ghost is usually described as a man in military clothing who moves through walls or closed doors and then goes out the window. And finally, another reported presence is this chap here, Napoleon III, who stayed at the Langham during his exile in England. The Napoleons were quite good at getting exiled. Now, this is not the Napoleon Bonaparte, but I think it's his great nephew. He's a friendly looking chap, isn't he? I would not like to meet his ghost. But his ghost apparently would stick to the basement. Today, the Langham remains a prestigious working hotel rather than a conventional haunted attraction. Guests book rooms for its service history and central location in London. Not because it has a few ghosts in it. In fact, I doubt that if you went there, anyone in the hotel would openly discuss it with you. Not good for upper class guests, ghosts and that. Now, I've definitely left the best for last. This is Chillingham Castle, my friends. Potentially the place you can stay at with the greatest chance of experiencing something ghostly. The castle's history can be traced back to the 13th century, although earlier structures were on this site, because it's a very strategic location, placed within a region repeatedly affected by border warfare between England and Scotland. This is in the northeast of England, this place, Chillingham Castle, in Northumberland, a place I've spent many, many, many years. Chillingham later developed from a defensive stronghold into an aristocratic residence, but reminders of its more violent past remain throughout the building, in the form of ghosts, of course. Today you can explore its staterooms, dungeon, armory and torture chamber. More unusually, guests can also stay overnight, some in some rooms, sometimes in self-contained apartments. That means that after daytime, after all the guests and visitors have left, overnight residents remain inside this ancient complex surrounded by stone corridors, courtyards and haunted rooms. Chillingham openly promotes itself as one of Britain's most haunted historic castles, not like the Langham, where they're too posh to talk about this. In Northumberland, where people are down to earth, they revel in their reputation as a haunted castle. The best known ghost is the Blue Boy, or the Radiant Boy as some have called him. According to the traditional account, guests staying in what's become known as the Pink Room would hear the cries of a child, apparently coming from inside or beyond the wall. The cries were said to occur around midnight and were sometimes followed by the appearance of a young boy surrounded in a blue glow. The story goes further to say that during renovation work in the 1920s, the remains of a child were discovered behind one of the walls, reportedly alongside fragments of a blue material. The remains were then buried, after which the apparition was seen less frequently. However, Later visitors have reported unexplained flashes of blue light in or around the room. Another of the reported apparitions is the white pantry ghost. The most famous story is of a footman guarding the family silver that was being stored in the inner pantry. Asleep one night, woken by a woman asking for water. Well, he took pity on her, seeing as she looked gaunt and frail, and he went to get water. But who knows what a footman had in mind? But when he returned with the water, she was not there, and there was no way of her exiting the room, for he had locked the door. The scoundrel. A third apparition, traditionally identified as Lady Mary Berkeley, sometimes called the Grey Lady. She was married to this fellow, Ford Grey, later Earl of Tankerville. He was a funnily shaped person, but I believe he was a hit with the ladies because he had an affair with his wife's sister Henrietta, and the affair became notorious in 17th century social circles. The bad thing about it was that in the 17th century that wasn't allowed, and he was arrested, jailed, and then tried and convicted of having an affair with his sister-in-law, but he was released afterwards without punishment. What a cad. But now, Lady Mary remained at the castle, isolated and humiliated while her husband lived elsewhere and died in 1719. And her spirit now wanders the building in search of the husband who deserted her, and maybe her sister as well, to take revenge. Witnesses have reported the sound of a dress rustling along empty corridors, accompanied by a sudden reduction in temperature. Some accounts describe a female figure emerging from or appearing beside a portrait before moving through the room. The torture chamber, which you would imagine has had a few deaths, has also generated a considerable amount of folklore, much of it centered around a torturer known as John Sage, this lovely chap here. According to the legend, John Sage was a soldier who became the castle's torturer after suffering an injury in battle. He is accused in later ghost stories of torturing and killing dozens and dozens of Scottish prisoners before eventually being executed himself. Not the sort of thing that happens much anymore. And thank heavens for that. Now, these apartments you can rent in Chillingham Castle are well worth it. Let me tell you, they're only a few £100s per week to stay in such grand environments. And Northumberland is a beautiful part of the world. And if, like me, you like to hike through hills and forests, and also be scared shitless by ghosts, Chillingham Castle is the place for you. Plus, they put on ghost tour and ghost hunt dates. This is the literal advertisement from their website, so you can see, depending on when you watch this video, but ghost tours galore. What a wonderful place. This is my favourite haunted location in the UK. I live not far from Chillingham Castle, so maybe that makes it my favourite. Well, that's it. I hope you've enjoyed this video and the rundown on the 5 most haunted places you can stay overnight in the UK. Do like, follow and share with your friends, and watch out for my next video. Farewell.